Good evening and welcome to We the People. Whenever there is an armed conflict, perhaps for any government anywhere in the world, apart from the retaliation that does take place in an insurgency zone, which has to be also armed in nature, perhaps every political dispensation hopes that a long-lasting solution to conflict can only lie in the laying down of arms by those who have decided to take them up. Which is why it becomes so critical that we have a cogent surrender policy, a rehabilitation policy. The fact that we actually don't have this was exposed with the case of Liaquat Shah, somebody that the Jammu and Kashmir police said was returning to surrender, but the Delhi police argued was still an active militant. That case is now with the NIA, but it has opened a public debate on whether India needs to relook what sort of surrender and rehabilitation policy we have, and what happens to those who actually pick up the gun and then decide to lay it down. What happens to their stories? Is it really from guns to roses or perhaps not? That's our program on We the People today. So let me start with you, General Jaiswal. As somebody who has served in Jammu and Kashmir, there are many who are concerned that what has happened with Liaquat Shah would actually send a poor signal to others who may have contemplated laying down their arms. What we saw in the early years of surrendering militants in the valley is that the army or the security agencies would encourage them to surrender only if they somehow became informers. What is your take on those who want to lay down their arms?
First of all, you made a mention about Liaquat Ali Shah. I totally agree with you that it has definitely affected the minds and psyche of the people who are sitting across. They'll have a second thought on it. But the question is why exactly it happened. You see, only 4 routes have been identified in Nepal, you see, which has not been recognized as yet. Now, 4 routes were recognized on the premise that Pakistan will be on board. Well, sorry, they are not. And I personally feel that Nepal should be recognized and we should have transit facilities over there, I'll call our safe houses or whatever it is. They're booked over there under IMA, etc. The laws are there. And thereafter they have a certificate that they come. Delhi police wouldn't have acted on them, I suppose so. Now, whether the army wants to encourage, I'm a firm believer. I was in 4 Corps, and if you've been following the story there, we did decimate the Alpha in great measure, and the most potent instrument that I used was surrender policy. And I think testimony to that is now, I think January 2012, we had 1,855 people from 9 groups surrendering.
How many of these people came back and became informers in some ways for the security agencies?
I'll come to that.
Because my question is this, that there's usually an ideological reason that somebody picks up a gun. So even if there's a disenchantment with that ideology, the solution for that person coming back may not be to come and work for the forces.
You see, it's not that we force them to work as informers. What happens is, if he works as an informer for us, we give him remunerations. After all, if he's come in, he is also used, not only as an informer, he's also used to trigger more surrenders. When people don't surrender and they're carrying out terrorist activities, well, they need to be decimated.
Okay, Ghulam Nabi representing the National Conference, the question is this. While General Jaiswal talks about Pakistan not really facilitating any line of control routes for those who want to come back, and that point is taken, the fact of the matter is that in this case, it's very hard to understand why the Jammu and Kashmir police and the Delhi police could not be on the same page. Where did we go wrong?
We cannot expect Pakistan to help us. That should be taken for granted, that they will not help us. They will try to create hurdles in any such process, which is aimed at reconciliation and rehabilitation of militants. On our part, if Delhi police got intelligence, it could have been shared with the Jammu and Kashmir police. It has not. What General Jaiswal has said, it's all truth, but some unpleasant truths, they are not going to divulge here. There is a competition between the agencies to secure militants, to secure surrenders, to secure arms, to get promotions, to get medals, and maybe some booty also.
How can you say booty? That's an irresponsible thing to say.
I take a
How can you say booty? Everything else is your opinion, but you can't say the last point without evidence.
We have seen in fake encounters, some person was taken, killed somewhere, and a gun was found on him. Where from that gun came?
So your point is that there is a competitive one-upmanship between the agencies, but isn't there a political accountability? Very briefly before I go to the others as well. For example, your government has said that there aren't actually enough jobs or educational seats in the valley to go around for these people who are coming back. So there's also a political problem.
The unfortunate thing is that political issues are being discussed by the police officers and generals. There was an unwritten code of conduct for generals, for police officers, till the time Mrs. Indira Gandhi was in power. It got diluted, and I believe we had Atal Bihari Vajpayee as the last visionary leader. Such policies are envisioned, such surrender policies etc. are envisioned by visionary leaders.
So it's interesting.
Not crafted by bureaucrats and generals and police officers.
Now this is not a political debate, but it's interesting that so many Kashmiris keep talking about Vajpayee as the last visionary leader, but actually the BJP in the state has opposed a surrender policy, saying it's giving amnesty for militants. General Jaswal, if you want a one-line comment, and then I want to take this to Maxwell and then Swaranjit.
I would just like to say that how exactly military plays a major role.
Yeah.
For instance, in the surrender policy which was made in Assam, the military made it for them. Over here, what was made in 2004 and 2010, the military has not been incorporated totally. An important facet is de-indoctrination. Like, I'll give you an example. In 2006, one of our Jawans happened to cross over. He stayed there for 1 month. When he came back, he was singing Quran and he was just talking and singing Pakistan. In 1 month, they indoctrinated him to that level. What about the terrorists who are there for 5 to 7 to 10 years?
But here's my question, and I don't know if de-indoctrination is actually a realistic goal. You can't expect somebody to return to a conflict zone where violence is still there, where the conflict is still alive, and somehow come back with a completely different mindset. B.G. Varghese, if I can get you in before I go to the police representatives on our panel. What do you make of the arguments you're hearing here of the competitive one-upmanship, according to the National Conference politician, between agencies to procure surrenders?
I think that's certainly so. The extent might vary, it's a matter of argument, but I don't think that it is non-existent. It is there. There is that element of competition. All that is there. There's no well thought out rehabilitation policy. And in Assam, for instance, Ulfa turned into Sulfa, and many of them were used as political brigades for whichever party was in power. Now, all these things happen because there are not enough jobs to go around for those who are already there, let alone those who come back. But these have to be factored in. Otherwise, the policy is going to fail.
In the Kashmir Valley, in the early years, the surrendered militants became Ikhwanis, completely disliked on the ground, actually exacerbating the problem, making it that much worse. Maxwell Pereira, speaking from a police officer's perspective, it's very difficult for an ordinary person to understand how there can be such two competing narratives. Let's take the Liaquat case, for example. How can one police force have a completely different assessment and another police force have a completely different assessment?
Barkha, let me first of all differentiate between the intelligence sharing and operations, aspects being shared. Nobody shares the operational aspects. I believe in this case the intelligence was shared by the national agency. It was there. Delhi police acted on that.
But the Intelligence Bureau at the central level also cleared Liaquat for a surrender.
Yes, but then what happens if that is done at the national level? Then the actual travel, whichever the route is used, if there are reception agencies, if there are centers where they could have come and that thing, the person is given a certificate that yes, this is a genuine surrender. Now Delhi police sitting in Delhi is not having somebody on the border. Think of the Bombay case, the 2611 case. The intelligence report was there about the terrorists coming by sea route. It was not acted upon. It was in the.
What are your concerns as a police officer?
My concern is that what would you feel as a police member if some information comes to me and I sleep on it, trying to verify, am I stepping into
concerns on the surrender policy are what?
No, I have no. It's wonderful to have a surrender policy, but then how best to operate it, how best to sort of coordinate these things, it obviously.
But here's
this
the
kind of
question,
a thing.
was it just an absence of coordination, in which case this would make it a one-off problem? Ajoy Bose, speak a little bit about your own experience. I'm not drawing direct parallels between what's happening in Jammu and Kashmir, what's happening in the northeast, and what's happening with Naxalism. But you have quite often written about how when you were growing up, you were actually drawn to the Naxal movement, and you wrote quite grippingly about an episode where there was one instance where a group of young Naxals were actually charging at a rich moneylender who was obviously seen as a figure of oppression. And when you had your knife unsheathed, you found that though you were meant to lead the charge, you just couldn't do it. When there's ideology at the heart of violence, what happens? How many people are really able to walk away from it?
It's a very, very difficult task, really. A whole number of young students get attracted. And, this happened in Latin America, in Africa, Asia, at certain parts of Europe as well. They got attracted to these violent ideologies in the late 60s, the early 70s particularly. And then many of them came back. But a lot of them could not come back.
Yeah.
Not because they didn't want to come back, but because they found it very, very difficult to be rehabilitated.
Yeah.
Now, in my case, for instance, my father was a very senior bureaucrat.
Yeah.
And that was 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago. So, but what I'm trying to say is that this is a very difficult process. But unless we treat it with the kind of attention and focus and sensitivity, it's much better not to have a surrender policy.